All right, welcome to this lesson on tarps and tarping. And yeah, I mean, we'll ask the question, why even bother tarping? A lot of kids will ask me this sometimes. Well, we have good tents and aren't they waterproof? Why would we bother to tarp? And there's a number of reasons why you tarp. And it's really to protect you from the elements. You don't want to actually spend your entire time in the tent. In fact, I say to kids, I make a rule on my camps that the tents are only for those people who are actually sleeping in that tent. So you don't bring in people from other tents into your tent. Of course, that would mean boys into girls' tents and girls into boys' tents. But also, we don't just get a group of people and say, oh, let's play cards. That's what we use tarps for. We can tarp and protect ourselves from the elements. And usually we're worried about rain and we want to keep things dry. And this is really, really important when it comes to our gear. We want to keep our gear dry. And so if we don't keep our gear dry, it really adds a lot of weight. And then you're going to carry that weight the next day or that day possibly on a trip. So tarping can be really good at keeping the gear dry so that we don't have to carry wet gear. It's also a really good place to hang up and put things to dry on the ridge line underneath the tarp. And we use this a lot, especially if things are damp out. It's a place that sometimes we can get things that do get wet to dry out a little bit. And things will get wet when it rains, that's inevitable. And they also prevent dew on cool, clear nights. So if you have a beautiful sunny day, often that night temperature drops and we get below the dew point and dew starts to settle on things and we can prevent the dew from settling in. The tarp also offers shade on hot sunny days. So that's an important thing too, especially for people who are more vulnerable to sunburn and stuff, is to be able to give them a place to get out of the sun, get out of the heat, possibly on a summer day, but even to avoid being sunburned. Tops offer a great place to store your gear overnight. This would include your camp kitchen materials, your pails, any of that stuff. A lot of it, yeah, it's okay. It's not going to be damaged if it gets wet, but it's a nice sometimes to be able to get up in the morning, especially if it's been raining overnight, to have things dry or pots and pans or those kind of things that might have been left out stay dry. It also is a good place to put firewood if you want to keep your firewood from getting wet or potentially dew on it, right? So tarps are very useful that way. Uh, I also really strongly encourage kids to tarp their tent, and that may sound silly because it's like, oh well, isn't the tent waterproof? Yeah, it is, and you'll be just fine probably if you don't. As far as getting wet inside the tent, you'll be fine if you don't tarp your tent. But if you do tarp your tent, what happens is you can take that tarp off or take down on a rainy morning. Imagine, and we've had this before, where we wake up and it's raining out. It's just terrible, and you want to kind of get going, and so you can pack up all your stuff, your sleeping bag, your clothes, your sleeping pad can be packed up inside your tent, and then we can even set it quickly, gently into your dry bags, keeping it dry. Take your tent down, which is now dry, and pack it all up and get your pack packed right underneath your tarp that was being used to cover your tent. So it really is a really worthwhile thing. And now the only thing that's really wet is your tarp. And because we tend to pack our tarps right on the top of our packs, outside them so that they're available if it rains during the day, they'll dry out and we're not carrying a lot of added weight with us. All right. So a lot of good reasons why. I mean, it's amazing how many people don't bother to tarp even on a nice day, and yet there's tremendously good reasons to put up your tarp. And it doesn't take that long if you know what you're doing. 10, 15 minutes and you can have your tarp up. Okay, methods of tarping. And my preferred, or one of my favorite methods is to use what's known as the ridgeline method. In the video that I show you where I put up a kitchen tarp, I do use the ridgeline method, okay? And that's this method here. It's being demonstrated right here with this image, ridgeline tarp. And you can see the ridgeline kind of, I'm just using my poker here to kind of go along the ridge line. And then we have four, in this case, four guy lines on each of the four corners. And this guy's done a really nice job. The ridge line is actually being pulled down by the four guy lines, which is really good. It's nice and taut. There's no looseness in it. Or you're not going to get any pooling. And it looks like he's in a bivy sack. It's not really a sleeping bag, but this is actually a kind of like a tent slash sleeping bag combined. And it has usually a built-in sleeping pad as well, so they can crawl right in that and sleep, and the tarp just kind of protects them additionally from the elements. And again, ridge line and four guy lines really works nice. The other one that they use is this diamond tarping, and this is the same sort of thing as using this, except for usually with a more squared off tarp, and you run it diagonally across the tarp, and this way you only have to have two guy lines. And this, I find this very handy when we're tarping our tents. It means that, less rope, we bring a fairly light ridge line. Of course, tarping your tent only works if there's trees or things that you can use. If you're tarping in the middle of a field or tenting in the middle of a field, putting up your tarp is just not an option for you. But this works really well, this system. Again, two simple guy lines and one ridge line, and away we go. So that's the diamond tarp setup. Another very common setup that you'll see is what's known as the center pole or lift method. And in this case, this demonstration here, the person has put a pole up, and then what they do is they use guy lines, usually four of them in the four corners. This one looks like you might even have a second tent pole up here because it's a pretty big tarp, and kind of help elevate it. And this really is good if the tarp is designed to be able to take a pole. It usually has to have some sort of reinforcing where you're going to put the pole. You don't just stick a tarp anywhere because you'll poke right through it. And that's not good. Now, another option is to actually, if I'm going to turn the pen on here, I'm going to show you. I like this option better, and I know lots of people who use this. There'll be a little loop on the top of your tarp, right up here at the top, and they'll run a line up to a tree like this. And instead of using a pole, they'll tie the tarp up this way, and using just a little pulley system over the rope or over a branch, they can pull this up with the rope and get it to whatever height they want, and then they can use the four guy lines around the outside. This is quite popular with really big tarps, and it can be really effective way to get the tarp at whatever height you want it and not have to worry about it. You can easily walk underneath them, and they work quite well in this system. Okay, so that's the center pole or lift method. Center lift, I would say, is the other one. Oops, my pen's still on here, so I'll have to turn my pen off. Okay, there we go. And the last method is what's known as a sort of a lean-to method. Okay, so lean-to is written over here. I'll turn my pen back on. Lean-to is over here. And we basically have a ridge line here, and we run the tarp straight down to the ground. And this works really good when you're trying to block the wind. And where could you put a fire? You might have a fire right here on the ground, and stuff. You'd want to make sure that you're not going to burn your tarp, and likely the wind is coming from this direction over here, over the top of the tarp, and so any smoke and stuff is going to billow out this way. Sparks aren't going to hit my tarp, and it works quite well. I have used this in Algonquin Park before when we've had really windy days and we just desperately needed a place to get out of the wind and be able to make a fire that wasn't just going to constantly blow out or blow out of control, and it worked really quite nicely. I didn't use my best tarp, and I kept it quite a ways back, but it was quite effective. Sometimes people will also just put the ridge line a little bit down, like maybe a foot or two down, and then they'll have this side of the tarp kind of go like this, and this is the tarp material from here folded over the ridge line, and then they'll run off a couple guy lines in either direction, and that works quite well as well. So they'll have just a little bit of an edge on it, so it's kind of like a half lean-to and a half ridge line system. I don't know if I would do that, but it's worth a try. And a lot of tarps have little holes and grommets you can run your tarp through along the ridge line here, which make it work really good anyway. So those are the methods that I find are most useful when we're tarping. Um, I'll now move down the note here, and just a couple things I want to make sure people understand. Make sure your tarp has no, I missed the word here, no loose places to allow water to pool in the rain. Okay, and they don't we don't want is water to pool on your tarp. You want it nice and tight everywhere. Keep it taut. Okay, and that way. Um, this prevents water from building up. And what will happen is if the water starts to build up in your tarp, and I've had this happen to me because I didn't do a very good job, and the water builds up, and then all of a sudden it lets loose and poosh, and a big waterfall splashes down right beside your tent or beside your food, and it can sometimes make a mess. But more annoying is it repeats itself if it's raining all night, if you have a steady rain, and sometimes it's like 30 minutes or 45 minutes for that water to build up, and then boosh, it lets loose, and it wakes you up every single time. And um, it's just not nice at all. So that it's a way to wake you up. And the other thing that I've had real problems with is loose tarps. They just flop in the wind like big time, right? They're just brutal for that. And flopping tarps are not fun. And just trying to underline the word flop here in the wind, making noise, and sometimes they can even damage the tarp. I've had it where my tarps have ripped and torn. Usually the cheaper ones, that are going to break that way. But just the same, you just don't want to have to deal with that. So a nice taut, tight tarp is really important. Um, all right, and then we'll go down here, some materials that they're made out of. Most high quality tarps are made of a polyester material, which is a lot like, I don't know, the outside of a winter coat or a fly on a good tent. They're expensive. They usually start at about 80 bucks and they range all the way up to $300-400. I've seen them if you're getting a really, really big one. The lighter they are, the more money they are. Even for a small one, you can get some that are really, really light, but they still cost like $150-200 because the lightweight materials and strength and good grommets in them, which are the little holes on the edges, so they're called grommets. They add expense and they use lightweight materials. And the other ones are these low cost polyethylene tarps. They're blue, that you can get. I'll show you some pictures you'll see here. They can sell for as little as, well, actually I've seen them as little as $5.99 for the really small ones, but an 8x10 usually goes for about $8 at Canadian Tire. And most of you probably have seen these before. If they flap in the wind, they make up a lot of noise. They're very annoying. They tend to be a bit heavier, but they're a pretty effective way to go, right? All right, so let's move on. When we're packing a tarp, packing your tarp, well, on trip, should say not in, should say on trip. So it is easily accessible. Okay, if rain hits you, you want it first. The bottom of your pack's not a good place for your tarp, so we tend to put them right at the top of our packs, right on the outside. And I do that partly because they tend to be wet and dirty, and I don't want to pack them in there with other things that I want to kind of keep more clean and dry and those kind of things. And if I do have a wet tarp, it will dry throughout the day if I have a nice sunny day and I'm not carrying any extra weight. They don't tend to carry a lot of moisture in them anyway, but it's still nice to have them. Fold your tent so it makes it easy to set up, and you can watch that in the videos that I do when I do the tarp takedown, taking it down. I show you how I fold up my tarp so that I can actually put it up all by myself. I don't need 2 people, 3 people to get my tarp up. It's something you can do all on your own. And pack your ridge line with your tarp and leave your guy lines attached, right? Guy lines are the lines on the corner of the tent, okay, that reach out. So the tarps that we use on our trip are, generally speaking, I have about 8 of these MEC Scout tarps. They're 3.9 meters by 2.9 meters, or about 13 feet by 9.5 feet. And these 2 tarps are usually carried by your chaperone. So your group is going to get 2 of them, and your chaperone's usually carry one each, and this avoids the students having to do it. Now, keep in mind the chaperones aren't usually carrying the food. You're going to be carrying food. They're going to carry other things to sort of offset that. Okay, and this is a picture right off the MEC website that has it showing it in a ridgeline setup. They don't show the actual ridge lines here. If I come back on here, you can see, the ridge line would go through this way, and there'd be a guy lines on each of the four corners. I can't see the one on the back corner, but that's okay. So that is that's the good tarps that we bring. We also bring some of these cheaper ones, and I don't know. This is just a picture off the Canadian Tire website of a basic blue tarp, and they're relatively inexpensive. This is what I give kids if they want to bring one. It's an option for them, but I encourage you to consider it. Sometimes kids look at what the weather's like and decide, yes, I want a tarp that I can put over my tent because it looks like we're going to get a few days of rain. And other times kids say, "Don't, I'm not going to bother. It's one more thing I have to carry and worry about." So it's a optional choice that they will decide to do or not do. But my experience has been that if you have a wet trip, having a tarp over your tent is a very, very good idea. All right, so that's the end of the lesson today. I remind you to watch the videos. There's a series of 4 videos on tarping. I'm mostly, I think I put up the ridge line, I put up the tarp, I take down the tarp, that kind of thing. Maybe three videos there. I don't demonstrate a video on tarping your tent, but I think you guys can figure that out from the other ones. So please watch those, and then you have, of course, the questions on the tarps questions that you can do as well. And hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time.